This is Jed Distler, and welcome to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to the Piano Maven through my Substack page by clicking on the link in the episode description. Paid subscribers get bonuses such as Piano Maven Zoom meetings, where we share listening experiences, and we will be having some special guests in the future. So please consider subscribing to help us reach out further into the piano community and to keep this podcast in production. Back in our first season, I talked about those big box downloads from the Bach Guild, where you get the download equivalent of a big box set, like getting hours and hours of music all bundled together for 99 cents. And I talked about a release that was called the Big Piano Concerto Box. So I'm browsing through my computer now and I'm looking through the Bach Guild Big Box catalog. And I'm seeing things like the big Schubert box, the big Vivaldi box, the big Ragtime box. They even had these little big boxes. I'm looking at something called the Little Big Bach box, which is 5 hours of music instead of 17 hours of music. I mean, that's still a bargain for 99 cents. And as I said the last time when I was discussing the Bach Guild boxes, most of the material in these reissues, in these download reissues, comes from the Vanguard catalog, because Bach Guild originally was a label that was an affiliate of Vanguard in the 1950s. But some of the material in these big box downloads is licensed from other labels, such as the Pro Art label that thrived in the 1980s and then it totally disappeared. And I've talked about this label on previous episodes. So anyway, for this episode, I'm going to go through what Bach Guild calls their Big Chopin box. And I've provided a link for you to look at it and order it if you feel so inclined. There's a lot of fine material here, actually. You get the entirety of Peter Serkin's Chopin CD for the Pro Art label. This was his only Chopin release on that label. He did, I think, 3 LPs or 3 CDs or 3 something or others for RCA Victor in the late 70s, early 80s. But this was the one Chopin disc for Pro Art. And it's very good. His performances are always contrapuntally aware and texturally transparent, although sometimes he plays down the unabashedly virtuosic ardor in pieces where you'd want a little more fire in the belly, such as in the coda of the Fourth Ballade, or those big climaxes within the F minor fantasy, or that volatile ending of the B major nocturne, opus 32, number 1. But he does offer some interesting and very convincing performances of the opus 63 and opus 41 mazurkas, as well as the E minor waltz and the A flat waltz, opus 34, number 1. The Chopin First Concerto appears here in the Vanguard recording with Rosina Levine. This also was included in the Big Piano Concerto box. Levine, I think, was in her early 80s when she made this recording, and she does not summon up a lot of power, especially in the third movement rondo, where the fast unison runs are a little cautious. I mean, understandably, perhaps. But her rounded phrasing and her natural rubato, I think, are worth thousands of piano lessons. Oh, I had forgotten to mention when I talked about this recording earlier that the first movement has that standard cut in the orchestral introduction that used to be commonly observed in concert and on many earlier recordings of the E minor concerto. It really wasn't until the mono LP era that you started to hear the first movement orchestral introduction complete on records. So that's one small strike against the Rossino Levine recording. But hey, you're not buying this for the orchestra, you're buying it for the piano player, right? However, for Piano Concerto Number 2, Bach Guild picked a recording with the Portuguese pianist Siqueira Costa, and he just had such a gorgeous sound, and the fluidity and the poetry that he brings to his solo part is just wonderful. And he's supported really admirably by Gilbert Varga and the Royal Philharmonic. This recording came out originally in a series of budget CDs issued under the imprimatur, the Royal Philharmonic Collection. Some of you might remember these discs. I think they came out in the late 90s. There was a whole slew of them. And there were some fantastic orchestral items in this series with Charles Mackerras conducting. There was a Richard Strauss disc, and he did a wonderful Berlioz Symphony Fantastique. But let's get back to Chopin. Also, in this box set, we have the Chopin Waltzes in the recording that came out on Pro Art featuring the Brazilian pianist Arthur Moreira Lima. And these are bracing and idiomatic and colorful interpretations, as good as any out there. And I had mentioned this recording when I did my Joyce Hatto scandal podcast episode, because these were the Chopin waltzes that were stolen for the Joyce Hatto edition. But they are authentic Arthur Moreira Lima, the Chopin waltzes, a really nice cycle. Also in this set, we have Bruce Hungerford's recording for the Vanguard label of the Chopin B minor sonata. And this is a fascinating interpretation, and it really surprised me when I first heard it, because given that Hungerford approached playing the Beethoven sonatas with really great integrity and rectitude in terms of following the text, his Chopin is relatively subjective and volatile with a lot of unexpected freedom, but always within the bounds of good taste and musical sense. For the preludes, Opus 28, we have the Vanguard recording by Jean-Marie Daré, who was one of the great French pianists of her generation, and her very clear and finger-oriented technique is really quintessentially of the French school. I've always liked these performances for their clarity and honesty, although I know that some listeners might find them to be on the dry side. Also, we have a few selections from the recording of Chopin's Polonaises made for Vanguard in 1967 or 1968 or thereabouts with the pianist Alfred Brendel. The selections from his Chopin Polonaise album offered here are the Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise, the Opus 44 F sharp minor Polonaise, the big A flat heroic Opus 53 Polonaise, and the Polonaise Fantasy Opus 61. This was the one and only Chopin album that Alfred Brendel ever recorded, and in an interview that he gave many, many years later, he said that this Chopin disc did not particularly make him happy, nor did it make my late friend Harris Goldsmith happy. He reviewed it for High Fidelity magazine, and the opening sentence of his review contained just two words, and these two words, followed by an exclamation mark, were these: occupied Poland. That's just priceless. I mean, that probably could have stood as the whole review, and collectors would have immediately understood. I actually like this disc, believe it or not, and that may surprise many of you, because you know that I blow hot and cold over Alfred Brendel's artistry, although I certainly respect the man. I mean, how can you not? Now, I do have to admit that Brendel inflects Chopin's Polonaise rhythms with more of a Prussian and a Polish accent, but I don't find him to be rigid or unyielding at all. And I would even say that Brendel's angular phrasings and rather spare sonority in the Polonaise fantasy convey a kind of nervous energy and linear tension that is actually akin to what Vladimir Horowitz often brought to this piece. And if you listen to the trio section of that A flat Polonaise, Brendel pays attention to shaping the right hand melody in the right way, just as Van Cliburn did, rather than focus all of his energy on those famous left hand octaves and just ignore that right hand. And even more surprisingly, Brendel's Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise has a really fetching and playful quality that I don't always hear in so called Chopin specialists. And by the way, there is a BBC performance with Brendel of the Andante Spinato and Grand Polonaise that came out on Decca. And I think that's even a more spontaneous recording. Then we have the Opus 26, number one Polonaise in C sharp minor, and the two Opus 40 Polonaises with the pianist Ronan O'Hara. And these are good, solid performances, as you always expect from this pianist. And these were in the Bach Guild big piano box that I spoke about in the first season. We also have one selection with Leon Fleischer. We have a beautifully thought out rendition of the Berceuse. Also, there's some material from the one disc that Guillermo Novaes recorded for the Vanguard label. We have her lovely, although kind of underplayed third and fourth ballades. And we have her very dashing renditions of the Black Key and Butterfly Etudes and the three Equusais. Ronan O'Hara is back again for a very good first ballade, not the most exciting in the world, but well played. Also with Ronan O'Hara, we have the two Opus 9 nocturnes, the C minor nocturne, Opus 48, number 1, and three mazurkas, the B flat, Opus 7, number 1, D major, Opus 33, number 2, and A minor, Opus 56, number 1. Also, he plays a very sensitive fantasy impromptu. I enjoyed that a lot. Oh, I see here there is more from Bruce Hungerford's Vanguard Chopin album. I talked about his B minor sonata a little earlier. We have masterful and very individual renditions of the F minor etude, Opus 25, number 2, the first of the Nouvelle etudes, a beautiful nocturne in D flat, Opus 27, number 2. There's also a Leon Fleischer performance of that I wish they had included, but this Hungerford performance is really quite lovely. Also, his recording of the C sharp minor Mazurka, Opus 50, number 3, is one of my very favorites of this piece. I even put it on the same level as Die Nulla Party, believe it or not. And last but not least, we've got a very worthwhile set of the four scherzos with Jean-Marie Daré. I think she recorded these for Vanguard in the mid to late 60s. I'm not really sure. You may know the correct recording dates. But anyway, she unleashes a truly demonic and exciting scherzo number 1 in B minor. And also, like Vladimir Horowitz, she plays the upward B minor scale at the end, not in unison in both hands, as Chopin wrote, but in interlocking octaves. Horowitz was famous for that. Oh, by the way, William Capell did that too in a live performance we have from his 1953 Australian tour. I wonder what other pianists played interlocking octaves in the coda. Maybe I can't really think off the top of my head who else may have done that. Jean-Marie Daré's second scherzo, I think, is a bit all over the place. It doesn't quite have the sense of line and repose in the trio that you might hear from like Arthur Rubinstein. And if the fourth scherzo's second theme doesn't really sing out as much as I would like it to, you cannot deny Jean-Marie Daré's rhythmic poise. And talk about rhythm, her articulation of the octaves in the third scherzo is like looking at brilliant and impeccable etchings, which are very different from those big brush strokes and the volatility that you get from Martha Argerich, who pretty much owns this piece. But I would not underestimate Jean-Marie Daré. She's a seasoned and authoritative Chopin player. So if anything in this collection piques your curiosity, then I would definitely download Bach Guild's big Chopin box. It's totally worth 99 cents. And, if it costs you a little bit more, like $1.29 or something like that, or even $1.79, it's still an extraordinary download bargain. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. I look forward to being with you for the next episode. So take good care until next time.